welcome everybody to this committee day of the Tennessee Fish and Wildlife Commission. I'm Jeff Cook, I'm the chairman of the commission, and we'll get started with the roll call.
Chad Baker. Angie Box. Here. Bill Cox. Dennis Gardner. Here. Connie King. Here. Tony Sanders. James Stroud. Here. Bill Swan. Here. Kent Woods. Here. Jamie Woodson. Here. Brian McLaren. Here. Kurt Holbert. Here. Jeff Cook.
Here.
Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Danette. And as I said, this is our committee day, so everyone on the committee will be doing that business, and tomorrow will be our full commission day where we vote on some of the issues we discussed today. So just like to welcome a few guests. We have Mr. Clarence and Miss Laura Dyes with us, and thank you very much for the salsa. That's very nice. Thank you. Appreciate that. And Rob Crabtree. Rob, why didn't you bring us some salsa or something? I mean, but
I'm always on the receiving.
Oh, okay. There we go. And Vicki Swan, Commissioner Swan's wife, is here. Well, she stepped out, but welcome, Vicki.
I think she sneaked out.
Okay. And then we have Garry Floeter, Tiffany Dabbs, and Richard Crabtree from CHC Mechanical Contractors. Welcome to you folks as well. So thanks for being here. So any other announcements before we get started from the commission? Bobby, any announcements? Great. Well, with that, I'll turn the meeting over to Mr. Dwight Hensley for a presentation.
Thank you, Chairman Cook and Commission members. Many of you were not here in 2013. Most of you were not, but that year the Commission passed a $3.9 million capital improvement project to do some major upgrades for the mechanical electrical system in our central office building. We just entitled that project Central Office Mechanical and Electrical System Upgrades, even though there were some other parts of that. Those were two major components. 2013, the funding was approved. The Building Commission approved the project in late 13. In early 14, we contracted with a consultant engineering firm. We spent the next 24 months of going through various phases of design. And in late 15, we advertised and received bids. And in early 16, we entered into a construction contract with CHC Mechanical Contractors out of Cookeville, Tennessee. In spring of 16, they started construction, spent the next 18 months constructing the project. In the late 17, they were complete and wrapped it up. And in early 18, with TWRA's assistance, they entered the project for a competition, I would call it, with the Associated Builders and Contractors, a Tennessee chapter of the Associated Builders and Contractors. And the project received a Construction Award of Excellence. So what I would like to do is to introduce Mr. Garry Floeter, the president of CHC Mechanical Contractors. Let him speak to the commission just for a little bit about the project, tell you a little bit about it. He has an award that he would like to present to the commission and to our executive director. Garry? Right here.
Thank you to this honor, and he stole my thunder. I had all my notes. I was going to go over these details, and Dwight, like most things that we've encountered with this experience, has been ahead of us in a lot of areas. This was a very challenging project. Can you imagine trying to change your socks and leave your boots on? That's what we were doing because we had to keep the building in occupied mode, had to maintain the environmental conditioning system. At the same time, we're changing out the heating and cooling from one system to another. So in essence, that's what we were doing. And I got to hand it, a lot of times in these type of projects, the owner can be very difficult. The owner can drive you up the wall, or the owner can work with you. In this particular case, I wanted to recognize Dwight and JJ and Mr. Brown as being very helpful and cooperative. We were likewise. It's a team concept. You know, there's no I in team, and this is a good example of how this project came together. The technology we utilized at the onset, Dwight was very skeptical. In fact, he grilled me after grilling the designers, and we had a similar project at Meharry that we had been through a few years earlier. I took Dwight and JJ and a group there and showed them the facility and what we had done and spoke with his counterpart with the university there. And I believe at that time you got a better comfort level with that. So to digress, variable flow refrigerant is new technology. It's state-of-the-art for this particular facility. So we went from a system that was built in the 60s, which was state-of-the-art for its day, to one that is state-of-the-art for this day. And we submitted this project to the Association of Builders and Contractors based upon our experience and the challenges. And the ABC is a member of contractors that get together and could relate to what we went through, and based on that, based on the submittals and the testimony that Dwight offered on behalf of our submittal, is how we were awarded this particular award. And I'd like to present that. Mr. Chairman, or, okay. Now, it's had a lot of fingerprints. We were trying to wash them off here, but basically, it's a construction award as the owner of the project. This particular award is presented to the owner of any particular project that has won this particular presentation. Okay.
Thank you very much. We
Thank you.
all your work.
Appreciate the
Thank
honor
you.
to work with you.
Thank you. I'd like to hand the ownership over to
Thank you. Thank you.
Where do you want to go? This is glass over here. It is.
I just wanted to say on behalf of the agency and the commission, we really appreciate working with y'all. And his analogy was not very far off. When we first looked at trying to do this, the minimum we had in the budget, we would have had to put in the budget was $750,000 to relocate for almost a year while they were doing this. Needless to say, all that had gone through that. But anyway, they were able to come in, and everybody had to move out of their section, and they kept working. It couldn't have been any better cooperation. And we even celebrated with a big barbecue dinner at the end. So it was really good, and a lot of people had to move. First time they'd purged their offices in 30 years. So there was lots of things found and lots of things that were moved, but couldn't have been a better experience. And because of the way they did it and the way they set it up, our utility bills, all of them except water, which wasn't really involved, have gone down significantly. We've seen a great cost savings between the LED lighting and all the other things. So anyway, great project. Thank you all very much.
All right, well, now it's time for Chairman Holbert with the Wildlife Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm having a hard time seeing. I'm seeing three candles. Every time I look, no matter where I look, they're in my eyesight. Anyway. Danette, those have got to go tomorrow. It's like I have to lean around one to look at y'all, and then depends on which one of you. There's a reason they didn't make the chairman sit in the front this time. They let you over there. It's some kind of punishment. I'm sure I deserve it. Anyway, I'd like to call on Joe Benedict, our Chief of Wildlife.
At least I get to look at deer antlers when I close my eyes. So, well, good afternoon, commissioners. Thank you for the chance to speak to you today about a term that we're calling featured wildlife management areas. And so that's a concept I'll be articulating throughout this presentation today. But let's start with a background. I'm sorry, I'm getting used to this, this new layout here as well. We've heard that there's an interest in increasing participation on our wildlife management areas. These are our public areas that you can hunt and fish and hike and do other things. And also that there's an interest in increasing management on some of these wildlife management areas. There's an idea that some of these areas with a little more targeted effort could move from sort of good to great. A couple ideas of how we could accomplish this would include shifting funding to those WMAs and also shifting staff. And with a statewide wildlife division now, both of these are potential. So we didn't identify any existing funds that we felt comfortable moving from one WMA to the other, to other WMAs. But we will work opportunistically to leverage partner funds. We feel that once these featured areas are highlighted, that our partners will come to the table, as they do frequently, and join arms with us to accomplish this. So we will look to do that in the next year. So this next year, the primary focus of these featured wildlife management areas will be for us to move staff around opportunistically and help on certain projects. So we talk a lot about prescribed fire when we talk about managing wildlife management areas and managing habitat. And that's kind of a short time period during the year when we kind of need all hands on deck. And so, again, with a statewide division, we can move our staff around for short periods of time to accomplish these special projects that we have, including prescribed fire. Oops, sorry. So regarding increasing participation, we've started the process with a wildlife management area user survey. This is a statewide survey that we're coordinating with UT, Dr. Pudial, who presented some things on our elk project a couple months ago to you. This survey is going to ask questions about folks that have visited surveys in the last year. What was their primary purpose for visiting the WMA? How far did they travel? Were they hunting, fishing, hiking, bird watching? You know, what were their various activities? There's also an economic component to this. So we'll learn the economic value of sort of their trips to their WMAs. And this is important, obviously, for local economies. There's money that the WMAs put into those local economies based on those trips. We also have kind of a little pilot project. You'll recall that the Cheatham Wildlife Management Area last year during our season setting process, you all interacted some early quota hunts a week or so before the statewide seasons. And so there's some measurements of participation at Cheatham that will give us an idea of how those specific changes to the WMA regulations or opportunities on the WMA were utilized by the hunters. And so that's one piece of this that we'll learn over the next several years. So now let's jump to the focus of this talk, which is how we can increase our management on these featured wildlife management areas. So these WMAs, there's 4 of them. We have one in each region. All of these are state-owned properties. We have the land management rights on these properties, which would include timber harvest. That's a key component of how we manage our WMAs. They're mostly close to urban areas, so we have a draw for the public to visit them. Just a reminder that all the WMAs require permits to use them, so there's a revenue source there. And we're calling this featured wildlife management areas for 2019, but many of these projects are multiple years. It'll take a long time to get these habitat changes in place. So the first featured wildlife management area that we have is the River Wildlife Management Area. This is in Region 1, so West Tennessee, south of Memphis. Let me back up one page. This is an 11,000-acre wildlife management area. It's our National Bobwhite Conservation Initiative quail focal area. This is a national program. NBCI is the acronym that we'll use. It's a national program aimed at participating states focusing on early successional habitat to try to restore quail. And there's a a lot of science that's gone into this, describing habitat conditions that should be met, describing how that habitat's managed continuously, and then also some requirements for how we monitor those quail populations. The idea is quail have been declining for a number of years. There's still some lack of understanding about why that is, but this is a targeted effort by a large number of states to try to make the conditions right as best we know them for quail, with hopes that the quail will respond. So at Wolf River, we've signed up to that program, if you will. We've committed to spring and fall quail monitoring counts. They're pretty intense, so it takes a lot of manpower to do that. And then also we've established 1,200 acres of early successional habitat already on the ground, and we'll be working to do some more. The staff there do about 500 acres a year of prescribed burning, which is a real kind of a low cost, a very cost effective way to manage that type of habitat. They also recently completed 70 acres of timber cuts to create a savanna. And I think as many of you know, it's a premier small game rabbit, squirrel, and woodcock hunting area. So that's the current conditions of the Wolf River WMA. Excuse me. So the focus management for 2019, and really it's going to be a couple of years beyond that, is we hope to reclaim about 250 acres of some areas that sweet gum have invaded with the new Fecon mulcher that you all provided for us. I think that is slated to be delivered shortly. And so we'll jump right in the driver's seat of that and start creating some habitat this next year. We also plan to treat 200 or more acres of invasive trees and shrubs using herbicide and then prescribed fire. There's another 100 acres of timber harvest planned to create an oak savanna. There are 5 new access roads and parking areas that will be new access points for that WMA. So those will provide access to hunters and hikers on that property. There's another component of the NBCI quail focal area, which is habitat monitoring. So we'll begin to participate in that. We were measuring the response of the habitat to our management. So that's a fairly involved process. And I believe the University of Tennessee will help us with that, the Center for Native Grasslands. And then again, we're going to continue that quail monitoring effort that we do there. So that's the focus management for Wolf River and Region 1 planned for the next year or two. The next focused WMA here in Region 2 is the Cheatham Wildlife Management Area. It's at 20,000 acres. We currently maintain almost 300 acres of early successional habitat, and that may sound like a small number, but as you know, that's a heavily forested area. So having 300 acres of sort of wildlife openings in early successional habitat is, it's a continuing battle to keep that open. This is one of the 2 areas in the state where we have an established forest management program. We have forestry staff on site there. There's a forest management plan. This forest management plan is primarily aimed at managing for wildlife. So that's a kind of a unique part of Cheatham. It's a premier spring turkey hunting area. Every year we find that out-of-state hunters are there frequently. There's a lot of birds there, good access roads. So we have a lot of use of the area. And again, from the season setting last year, there's an emphasis by the staff, by the agency, on increasing hunter participation in harvest there. So the focus management, this is a 5-year project. We have nearly finalized a forest management plan. That's a 5-year plan. I think we're 1 meeting away, if I'm not mistaken, from having that finalized. But some of the high points of that management plan would be to create 100 acres of savanna with thinning and prescribed fire. Actively managing a couple hundred acres of loblolly pines, both for early successional habitat and then also to naturally regenerate those pine stands. Another 50-acre block of hardwoods that'll be clear cut, again, to create some early successional habitat. And then they've got an annual oak regeneration cut of about 50 acres a year, and that'll rotate around the location. And then again, continuing to monitor hunter participation in harvest. Bridgestone Firestone Wildlife Management Area, this is in Region 3. It's 20,000 acres now, and it's more than doubled in size since 2008. So this is it's a good place to do some active management. It's a highly visited site, and there's 2 particular reasons for this. There's a wilderness hunting experience that you can have when you go here. It's a big area. You've got to work to get to some of these places, so it's a little remote as far as having to walk or ride your mountain bike maybe to get to the sort of the back ends. And then there's also karst topography, which obviously includes caves. So there's a couple things that draw people to this wildlife management area in particular. It's also a state-designated quail focal area. So we joined the NBCI program. We kind of signed up for that, high maintenance, if you will, or high input management area. But we also have a couple other ones throughout the state that we're going to do a lot of effort to work towards early successional habitat without necessarily all of the criteria that the NBCI program has. So this is a state quail focal area, Bridgestone, Firestone, and there's about 2,500 acres of managed early successional habitat at this point. And again, because of the remoteness, it's a premier deer and turkey hunting destination as well. So in 2019, the focused management for Bridgestone is that we want to double the acres of prescribed fire. And I mentioned earlier that this is a very cost-effective management technique. It's also a very labor-intensive management technique. You've got to have a lot of folks on the ground to accomplish that safely and correctly. So we're going to move from about 750 to 1,500 acres a year. So that's a good workload that's been added to their plate. We also want to thin about 1,500 acres of pine, again, to move this habitat to early successional habitat. And then there's about 400 acres of invasive grasses that are in our existing early successional habitat that they're going to try to eliminate. And then finally, the fourth area that we're going to focus on in 2019 is the North Cumberland Wildlife Management Area. And many of us visited the Elk Viewing Tower in September, and so we were at this site not that long ago. So it's about almost 200,000 acres. Again, it's a very highly visited WMA with over 11,000 visitors to the Elk Tower, and then about 12,000 plus off-highway vehicle users annually. And this is the second area in the state where we have forestry staff located on site with about a 21,000 acre active forest management program on that property. As we know, it's also the only public elk hunting location of public land in Tennessee, so that's a pretty unique feature there. It's a premier deer and turkey hunting area. There's lots of areas lots of road access, lots of rugged terrain. And then we also have some cerulean warbler management that's being done at elevations above 2,100 feet. So this is another 5-year effort here for 2019 through 2023. You've heard from Joe Elkins, who's a wildlife management area manager, a couple times here recently, and we heard from Brad recently as well about the Elk Research Project. But the Elk Habitat Improvement Project is targeted on some of these less slopey areas, if you will, on the WMA. And the goal is to develop 300 to 500 acres of elk habitat during this project. And the Elk Research Project, just to kind of hit the highlights, the population estimate of elk has kind of evaded us somewhat. We're hoping that with this new techniques, we'll come up with a good population estimate. Additional things like the bull to cow ratio. Also learn about breeding success of cows. Are there enough males out there? Are they able to find each other? And then also a diet analysis piece, which is, what are the elk preferring to eat up there? And then also what the nutritional value of those food sources are. And then here's a neat partnership that we have with National Wild Turkey Federation. I believe tomorrow we'll be presenting them with a recognition. But here's an on-the-ground project that we've worked with NWTF. In fact, they received the grant for this, and we're helping out. But there's a co-funded project to do some timber harvest and then maintain those areas with prescribed fire. And you'll note the yellow there, the grouse knob at the bottom. Those of you that were on the commission field trip, we actually parked the vans at Grouse Knob, and we got out and kicked the dirt. I think it was the last site that we visited. So there's also Yellow Springs and Bear Wallow. So that's over 1,000 acres right there on that one area that will continue to be worked on in the next couple of years. And then there's a bear population survey as well that will begin next summer. So just to kind of recap, during 2019, we're going to feature 4 wildlife management areas to add some additional effort to. We also will, through this UT survey, understand excuse me, more of how wildlife management areas users use those properties, what their primary reasons for going are, how much money they spend, and those kind of things. We'll leverage our existing staff by moving them around where we can to kind of get more for our bang for our buck. There may be some partners that want to join us in these 4 areas. They may have an interest, as we saw from the National Wild Turkey Federation. We want to push these from good to great. So some of these are on the verge of just being outstanding areas, and just with a little bit more of attention and a little more effort, we can push these areas more quickly to that desired habitat condition. And last night I did a calculation of what the acres here. I went through a lot of acreage over and over on each of these slides, and there's over 5,000 acres of habitat work that we hope to implement in the next 1 to 5 years. So I was pretty proud of that number. So, and then once we get the word out to the public on these completed projects, hopefully we'll see increased visitation and utilization of not just wildlife, but the public as well. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to continuing to manage our great land resources that we have here in Tennessee.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you for the time and effort that you and your staff put into this. Is there any questions, Mr. Chairman?
So I'd like to thank Mark Goodland for getting this started and Joe for picking it up. And just give a brief little history. You know, the agency, the commission and agency are always looking at ways to improve opportunity for hunters. But, you know, ever since I've been on the commission for 4 years, there's been discussion of what can we do to really make the WMA special. And this really got legs when Commissioner Holbert and Commissioner Cox suggested we meet at Cheatham and just sort of look at what's going on there and get some ideas. And then I appreciate you guys and your staff, as Kurt said, to push this forward this last 2 years. This is exactly what we wanted. And to plagiarize you, we want to go from good to great. And, you know, we ask that you look at each region and find something that's really good, but let's spend some time and money and enhance it and make it really special, and then move on to the next project and make that special. So thank you so much for what you've done and continue to do.
Commissioner Box, you're going to ask where Wolf River is.
Yeah, where's that located?
Box.
I was going to put a map. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we need a map. I want to first thank you for going over this. Very interesting, and I appreciate this time and effort you put into it. Is there like a time frame, or I know like the elk is 5-year plan, but on the Bob White Quail and the conservation project, are they going to give us that's interesting to me. I was wondering how they're going to analyze that and get back to us. Is there a certain time frame they're going to be doing spring and fall, or are they going to?
So you're talking about the NBCI
Yes.
quail focal area?
Right.
So I guess I'll look to Mark. This is part of, some of the data go into the national, it's kind of southeastern, but it's way bigger than the southeast as we think of it. So the focal counts that we do, the quail counts in the focal areas get put into a different data set, and they look at those regionally and beyond the state. So there's some rolling up. We're participating, I guess I should say, in this large scale project. We'll have our own data for Tennessee, but there's some other analysis that's done with those data. I don't know the timing on that, but there are spring and fall counts. This habitat work, you take a FECON mulcher and you drive around for a day or two, and you can see what you've done, right? So you've made a huge dramatic sort of landscape level change, but the response of the vegetation takes a little bit of time, and then the response of the bird takes time. So I think the NBCI program is really kind of a longer term. We're happy to provide reports. I don't know what the reporting is on that, but I imagine there's internal reports about what we've accomplished. We're happy to share those with you.
That'd be great. If you could just do that when we get something, that's
Okay.
interesting to me. Thank
Sure.
you so much. Thanks.
I think we ought to have a raffle to see who gets to drive that mulcher around. That looks like fun.
Yeah. Commissioner Gardner.
Thank you, Chairman, and thanks, Joe, for the presentation. I appreciate it. The Wolf River in particular, I got a couple questions on. Recently this year, we approved gun hunting in Unit 1, and I saw the presentation showed more access roads and parking areas, and I wonder how that works together as far as having rifle hunting and then kind of cutting it up a little bit more to where you have more access and parking. And does that need to get looked at closer, or did y'all consider that when you, with your proposal?
That's a good question. I don't have that level of detail about this. Is Jim Hamilton here? Kirk, do you know the answer to that? And if you may want to step to the mic. Okay.
maybe it's something that we could all look, the commission and Jim and Kurt all look at together and decide maybe what's the most effective way to use that with the new parking and access roads. And then also the quail, what is the measure of success when you I know quail populations in Tennessee have been down for years, and people have tried and tried to get quail populations back up, and with very limited success. So what's going to be the measurement you use to say that you have been successful with these savannas and the creation of all these things? I mean, is there predator control involved? Is there how do you plan on getting that success when it's been difficult up to now?
That's a good question, and I think the focus of NBCI is actually restoring habitat, and the quail measurement, and there's some other birds that are involved or that are included in those counts, songbirds. I think that's kind of an indication of how successful the habitat management has been. So I'm not sure if there's a set level of quail that we're looking for. Obviously, no quail now and no quail later would be a failure, right, or not non-success yet. But if I could ask Mark Goodland, who's been involved in that probably since its inception, he could probably help answer that question.
Mark Goodland, Habitat Program Manager. With the National Bobwhite Conservation Initiative, the goal is to increase, restore bobwhite populations to huntable areas on the landscape where it allows that. I can't remember the exact number, but there's I know over 20 NBCI compliant quail focus areas now, and within quail range. Of course, they've all come in at different periods of time. NBCI, which is housed at the University of Tennessee, one of their staff is also a data manager. So as I understand it, the habitat information and the quail monitoring will go into a central database. One of the advantages of doing this, we as quail managers for many years fought that we managed on an individual state basis, and trying to compare data or lack of data from one state to another was difficult. And so this has given us a lot of consistency now, and I'm not sure when the first analysis will come out on some of these areas, probably about over a 5-year time frame, giving time for the quail to respond to habitat changes, and also to develop a trend, have a long enough period that you could develop a trend. But I assume they're going to be releasing the data as the years go by, within the next 5 years on those areas. And they are doing it to a level where they will come up with a reliable, quail per acre density also. So, and I'm sure we'll have various levels of success. Some of the areas are larger than others and sit in a different position on the landscape. They do have control areas that they'll be comparing to that are just on the general landscape that are similar to each one of those WMAs. So again, we just look forward to seeing, and the idea of this is supposed to try to really show what we do when we're doing our best effort on a focused area, what kind of response we get by quail as well as other grassland songbirds.
Thank you, Mark. Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Joe. You got one person you want to introduce?
Yes, I do. Thank you for this privilege. So I just want to introduce to the commission, we recently hired Mr. Wally Akins, Mr. James Wally Akins, if you could stand up, Wally, as the new Region 3 Wildlife Program Manager. So he's joined our staff, made an advancement there. And so as James comes up for the next presentation, I just want to take a moment to publicly express my appreciation to James Kelly, our deer program leader, as well as the entire deer team. If you're on the deer team, would you stand up or wave your hand? I think we have at least 2 or 3 members here. So these folks have, over the last year plus, worked hard on this deer plan, which is the next agenda item, and just want to publicly thank them for their efforts. I know there's been a lot of learning about current science and best management practices, and I think there's been some good, healthy scientific professional debate among the group. So a lot of learning. And we also had great engagement by stakeholders, including some commission members. We held focus groups throughout the state. We had involvement with our partners. I also want to specifically thank the Tennessee Wildlife Federation for their resolution a year and a half or so ago on that. But all of our partners and stakeholders were engaged really well throughout the planning process. So I'm excited about the content of the plan that you guys are going to hear about in a moment from James. And specifically, we're implementing this plan. We're doing the pieces that the plan says that we're going to do next. By implementing those, where it's going to take the deer program in Tennessee in the years ahead. So appreciate the privilege there.
All right. Thank you, Joe. All right. Mr. James Kelly, our deer coordinator.
Thank you, Chairman Holbert, and thank you, Joe, for those kind words. And I'm very excited to be presenting to you today, Commissioners, to share a preview of our draft strategic plan for deer management for the years 2019 through 2023, which is now available for public comment on our website. And you can see the link there where it's going to be available for members of the public to go there and read the plan and provide public comment. And there'll be a Gov Delivery bulletin. I know you guys have all heard about the Gov Delivery system, the email marketing software that we're using. That's going to go out tonight to bring folks' attention to the plan, and so they can read it and provide feedback if they'd like. So before I go any further, I'd like to acknowledge my co-authors, the members of the deer team, or I guess our formal name is the Deer Management Standing Team. But we go by the deer team, and it's been a journey, and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears have gone into this plan, and I'm really proud of each of these deer team members, and I want to acknowledge each of them by name because I don't know if I'll have another opportunity before we finalize this thing. I'd like to acknowledge Brian Chandler, our forestry program leader, Michael McCord, our private lands biologist, Dr. Brad Miller, our elk program leader, who's here today. And we also had biologists from each of the regions be on the team. So moving from Region 1 to Region 4, we had Chad Harden in Region 1, Dr. Russ Goodland in Region 2, Ben Layton in Region 3, Dan Gibbs in Region 4. And we had law enforcement represented on the team as well. Sergeant Leith Conendike served on the team, and you all met Dr. Dan Grove recently, and he joined the team when he came on board. So thank you to deer team members, and I also want to thank Chuck Yost, our team sponsor, who served as the liaison between the deer team and our executive staff. And yeah, I know Chuck has a lot of elbow grease in the plan as well, and so thank you, Chuck. So previously, our updates, we've given several updates throughout the course of the process. I focused a lot on process, but today I'm just going to go very briefly through that and hopefully get a little bit more into content. So as a deer team, we've done a lot of structured trainings and workshops, a workshop on systems thinking, training on human dimensions. We did our manager's model workshop, which I'll talk more about in a moment. And then we also had our several team meetings just focused on plan writing. So a lot of structured workshops like that. We brought on a strategic planning and stakeholder engagement specialist to help walk us through the process. This is DJ Phil Sang and Dave Case of DJ Case and Associates. They have a very reputable firm in the realm of natural resources, and they were a huge help to us throughout this process and still are helping us. Another thing we did is we hosted a professional conference called the Southeastern Deer Study Group meeting. It was just so happened to be Tennessee's turn to host this meeting of deer biologists, deer managers, and deer experts from all over the country attend this meeting annually. And we hosted it and made the theme of the meeting state agency deer management. Had experts on that topic from all over the country come, and we learned from them, and we then applied the lessons learned from that into our plan development process. Another thing, as I shared at a previous meeting, we did focus group meetings with our stakeholder representatives or agency partners, federal representatives from federal agencies, sister state agencies, NGOs, representatives from the agricultural community and municipalities, and just listened to what they had to say about deer management in Tennessee and what their expectations for this plan were. We also met with the public. We held 3 public meetings, 1 in each grand division of the state. We gave a presentation of just about where we were with the plan and where we were headed with it. And we also had opportunity afterwards to engage with the members of the public in an open house format. And we and captured a lot of good feedback on that and incorporated that into our thinking and gave us some good things that we really needed to address in the plan. And then for those folks who couldn't attend a meeting, we did Facebook Live, and then we also posted a recording of the public meeting on the website so folks could watch that and provide their feedback that way. And I think we had about 631 as of yesterday. When we took that down, we had 631 people comment. So as I mentioned, we did a lot of workshops, and one of those workshops was our manager's model workshop. To kind of share what this is like, an analogy of what this is in a manager's model. Think of it in the business world, your business model. Oftentimes you'll work on your business model, excuse me. This is looking at how our model of management in Tennessee. And one of the things that we developed, and I've shared this before, is our desired future condition for deer management in Tennessee. And it wasn't necessarily a 5-year desired future condition, but we think this 5-year plan is going to move us significantly closer to this desired future condition. And I'll just take a moment to read that. The desired future condition is that white-tailed deer populations are managed within an adaptive framework, utilizing scientifically valid information at the management unit level. Objectives for each unit balance biological and social carrying capacity by considering the values of stakeholders. In regular proactive engagement with stakeholders, identify significant changes in stakeholder values and/or social carrying capacity that may warrant adjustment of objectives within a unit. And as I shared before, in other words, we want to be stakeholder-focused, science-based, and data-driven. So now digging in a little bit more into the content of the plan. Well, I guess before I get into the actual content, I'll share another high-level thing about the plan. As you can see here, the subtitle is it's a strategic plan for the systems, processes, protocols, and programs pertaining to the management of white-tailed deer in Tennessee. All those things combined are, encompass the deer management program, capital P program in Tennessee. And so the plan is very systems and process focused. It's not very focused on management outcomes, with the exception of our CWD goal. However, one of the processes that we'll be working on in this plan is one for identifying management objectives for each of our management units. So identifying management outcomes will be a product of delivering this plan. And that'll make more sense once I get into the content of the plan. And we believe that this plan is going to be really helpful in developing annual work plans for myself, other members of the DEER team, and in some cases, folks outside of the DEER team for certain objectives that will need to span multiple work units. And obviously, this will obviously guide identifying funding needs, and you will see these objectives, strategies, actions identified in this plan cited as justification in our annual budget cycle in form of a budget request. Some major benefits that we see of the plan are transparency between the agency and the commission and with stakeholders, provides focus and efficiency. A couple other words that you could add there are accountability and unity. And so now digging into the content, There's 6 goals. We have 6 named goals. I won't read them now. I'm going to go through each of the goals, share the goal statement, and share some of the big ideas behind each of these goals, which in the plan are captured as objectives, strategies, action in hierarchical order. So this first goal, and this is the cornerstone of the plan and has by far the most content in the plan, is our science goal. And this is the goal statement is to monitor impacts at the management unit scale with scientifically valid protocols. Oh, sorry, excuse me. And so really the essence of this goal is to identify what are our key metrics in regards to deer, people, and habitat in Tennessee, and not only identify what our key metrics are, what are the criteria that we're going to use to, does each metric have to be included into our program. Some of them we have a pretty good idea, like for deer, we obviously want to monitor the deer harvest at the management unit scale. We want to start monitoring the deer population. With people, we want to be able to monitor stakeholder desires in 3 major people groups or stakeholder groups: hunters, farmers, and the general public. Get scientifically valid information about their attitudes, opinions, and desired population outcomes regarding deer in their management units. And then a trickier one that we want to get started on, we know it's going to be a challenge, is being able to monitor the habitat or impacts to habitat that deer may be possibly having in a particular unit where there's a lot of deer. So we also, not only do we want to identify what metrics we're going to, and when I say metrics, I mean something that you measure or a measurable. Once we identify those, we want to take a look at the scale at which we're going to monitor those, and that's where that management unit scale comes into play. And we're working with Tennessee Tech actually right now on a project where they're using some pretty sophisticated cutting-edge technology to use a data-driven approach to use a lot of the data that the deer data that we have, some available data sets that are out there, statewide data sets, to delineate what the optimal delineation for our deer management units in Tennessee. We also identify the frequency at which we want to get each of these metrics. Obviously things like the harvest we want to measure annually, and we're actually in the process of we're working with UT to develop a contract to do an annual harvest survey so we can monitor the harvest annually. There's other things like, especially as it pertains to people, those type metrics, we don't think they're going to be as dynamic, and so we can probably do those like once every three to 5 years. And so during this 5-year plan, we propose to do one kind of big survey for attitudes and opinions of hunters, farmers, and the general public. Then also for each of those metrics, identify how certain do we need to be for each of those. What's the level of precision? And precision is just the level of uncertainty that we can be comfortable with. So plus or minus 10%, or a word you might hear is a coefficient of variation, which is a stats word. But so we also want to be able to identify that. And once we identify all of those things, identify the methodology to get there, and come up with a protocol, which for us is going to be end up in the form of a standard operating procedure. So that's, I spent a lot of time on that slide, but this is the cornerstone of this plan, and where a lot of the work's going to come from for this 5-year plan to get us set up. But we aren't just doing science for the sake of science and just because we think it's interesting. We're getting that information to inform our decision making, and that leads us to our decision making goal, to make decisions using objective, transparent, and data-driven processes. And when I say decisions, for us as TWRA, it's really deciding what to recommend to you all. So we just make recommendations to you, but we want to be able to justify and defend those recommendations that we're giving to you. And so in this goal, we want to set up a process for setting our population objectives for each of our management units once we have those established. And so those things I mentioned in the previous goal, things like the management units, the human dimensions survey, those will play a major factor into identifying what is the objective, increase, decrease, or stay the same as far as the population goes. And another thing we might set an objective for at the management unit level is the age structure. And once we have objectives set, we also need to identify what are our management options to achieve those objectives. And once we do that, come up with a process that will guide our decision making. And this can be as simple as if this metric says that and that metric says this, then we're going to recommend alternative A. And then there's some more sophisticated processes called structured decision making that can balance multiple objectives at the same time. But that's something we're going to move towards. But those are the types of data-driven processes that I'm referring to there. And then, so subsequently, we want to establish a similar system for our wildlife management areas, or at least a system where the decision-making on our wildlife management areas is well aligned with the deer management unit that it lies in. So whereas those first two goals were very much focused at a pretty large scale, the deer management unit scale, this next goal is called our support goal, and it's at a much finer scale, the landowner or community scale. And the goal here is to develop programs that allow landowners and or communities the ability to address localized impacts. And so in this goal, one of the objectives is to develop guidance, and for us, again, it's going to be in the form of a standard operating procedure for assisting communities with deer overabundance. This is an emerging issue in Tennessee. We're having more and more communities reaching out to us for support, and we just want to make sure that we're helping them address their issues, but also that it's consistent in each of the regions of the state. We're delivering that assistance in a standardized fashion. The other thing we want to take a look at is our deer depredation permit system, and make sure that stakeholders, particularly farmers that are experiencing impacts, are able to alleviate those impacts. And so we want to take a look at that system, see if we can streamline it. We also want to improve the accountability and transparency of that system as well. And then finally, in this goal, we have another objective about assessing our deer management assistance program. We currently do have a deer management assistance program in Tennessee, and several states have these, and commonly referred to as the DMAP program. And as I said, we do have one here, but demand for it is low, and so we want to take a look at, is there a need for additional antlerless harvest for landowners in Tennessee, and if so, why is enrollment so low in our program, and revise accordingly. And the next goal is to minimize the threat of chronic wasting disease. We couldn't have a deer plan and not have chronic wasting disease in it, because it is a big deal, obviously, as much as we've talked about that over the past several months. Really, the essence of this plan doesn't really focus on chronic wasting disease, but we did want to make sure it was at the goal level, because we are taking it very seriously. So the objectives under this goal largely reinforce the preventative efforts that TWRA and the Commission are already doing. We're leading the way in that regard. So it just kind of reinforces a lot of those things that we're already doing. It mentions surveillance, but largely references the surveillance plan that we shared at the September meeting that you heard about from Dr. Schuler, and our response plan, which, as you know, we're currently that we have and that we're currently revising. So those objectives are in there, but it's largely referencing these other existing plans. Next, we have our communication goal, which is to foster increased understanding about deer with the public, and this is kind of a two-pronged goal. We have our education objective, which is kind of the one-way broadcast of information across all of our platforms, social media, website, GovDelivery. Then we have our engagement, which is more of the two-way conversation. And so On the education front, or information education, we want to improve hunters or the public's understanding about biology regarding deer, deer management, and deer hunting. In engagement, we want to increase or improve the dialogue with key stakeholders, and this could be internal and external stakeholders. Just make sure we have that consistent dialogue. And then also in the engagement, I want to explore the working group format for select issues, and one particular issue that we think will be a good fit for this, to pilot this a little bit more, is the deer depredation permit system. Involve some external stakeholders in like a working group to help revise that system. And then finally, our resource goal, which is identify adequate resources to implement this strategic plan or just deer management in Tennessee. And so there's an objective about identifying funding, objective about enforcement, and making sure regulations are enforceable and that enforcement has what they need for deer management in Tennessee. An objective about citizen science. There's some opportunities there to meet some of our objectives in the science goal, leveraging citizens who are passionate about deer and want to help us out. The caveat there is, going back to the science goal, it just needs to be scientifically valid, but there are some opportunities there with citizen science. There's an objective about our personnel, making sure we have adequate personnel to meet, to deliver this plan. We do anticipate some increased demands for as far as sampling, things like that, so make sure we have adequate personnel, and also expertise, which may not come in the form of agency employees, but cooperative agreements or contracts with university folks. And then also for the personnel that we do have, making sure they have access to professional development, so they can stay current with the best practices in deer management and current with the scientific literature regarding deer management. So to kind of recap what I just went through, again, we went through those 6 goals. Our science goal, which is getting that information coming in at the interval that we want it, so that we can apply it to our decision-making and guide our decision-making. And these 2 goals, science and decision-making, they go hand in hand. And once we get those systems in place, we'll start to be able to evolve, and the one will improve the other as we iterate over time. And then also we have our support goal, making sure those stakeholders or landowners can address the impacts that they're experiencing on their property. Our chronic wasting disease goal, prevention, surveillance, response, communication, making sure we're communicating with the public, make sure we're engaging with those key stakeholders, and then just securing the resources to deliver. So that's the content. I'll wrap up by just kind of sharing what's next as far as plan adoption, plan finalization. Obviously today, December 6th, we're giving the preview of the plan. Starting tomorrow will be the day 1 of the 30 days. Today's, I guess, a bonus day for those who read it tonight and provide comment. We got a little bit of time after the 30-day comment period to synthesize those comments and revise the plan accordingly. And of course, we'll be reading comments as they come in, so we'll obviously get started on that before January 6th. Then hopefully we'll have a final plan on February 21st at the February Commission meeting. And so, as I said, the plan's available for public comment on tn.gov/TWRA/deer plan. And so, commissioners, if you have any specific questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Thanks, James, and thank you to you and the deer team. Mark Goodland, I know you had a part in this getting it started. Bobby and Joe Benedict, but thank you all, and Chuck. There's a lot of people that took a whole lot of extra time and traveling across the state listening to a whole lot of different factions. I was amazed to hear how the different people felt about deer management in Tennessee, depending on what shareholder group they were with. It really was really mind-boggling, and to try to come up with something that would somehow satisfy a little part of each group is quite a task. But is there any questions?
And I too would like to echo what Commissioner Holbert said, and James, and the entire deer team. And Mark, we started talking about this about 2 years ago, and we settled between, say, 18 to 24 months you thought it would take to get it done, and we settled on 22 months, and that was this month, and y'all got it done. So, and I know it's been a lot of work that's gone into this, and a lot of effort. Really do appreciate that. I think something that from my perspective of when I read through this, you read it and you say, well, not all the questions are answered, and that's right. It's just sort of like the house plans, where this is the plan, but you don't know what the carpet is yet, the faucets are yet, the cabinets, but those get done later, and if you don't like it, you change it because those weren't what you thought it would be. So I think it's important to know this is not the final step. It's just the roadmap. But thank you so much for all y'all have done. I think it's a great plan.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
All right.
All right. Wow, no questions. All right. Oh, Commissioner Stroud.
Sorry, James, help me with this.
Yeah.
Just real quick, and I know I'm being, well, on the support part, with the guidance for assisting the communities with deer overabundance, is there a law of, or is there a regulation about being able to hunt within a city limits? Were they to be able to take deer in within?
I'm going to defer to law enforcement on answering that question.
Is there a state law that says that you can hunt in towns and urban areas?
Hello, Cape Taylor from law enforcement. A lot of cities have city ordinances that say that you can't shoot inside of city limits, you can't shoot a pea shooter, a bow, anything. But state law supersedes those city ordinances, so that would be a defense. If you were legally hunting in that situation, it would be a defense. Now, it gets into situations, if you're sitting somewhere that would be reckless, they could charge you with reckless endangerment or things like that. But the state law would supersede the city ordinance.
The state law would, okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I got a phone call about that and a picture of a deer this week. And it was in Franklin next to the, I guess, the Mercedes place. It was huge. And they were asking, can they shoot him? And I didn't know. Oh. Okay.
Do you want to get into the depredation? There's
Okay,
this one you're talking about was, I'm familiar with that one.
Okay.
But
It's on your wall.
no.
I can show you a picture. It's pretty, okay.
But the depredation permitting, you can, a landowner can apply for a depredation permit. An officer will come out and look at the site and give them options of things they can do. And then there are also, options where they can shoot it with bow, they can do scare tactics, whatever, depending on the situation. The officers will most of the time write on there where there are comments at the bottom, use archery only equipment or whatever's safe there. Sometimes ensure your backstop is proper, things like that. But we can give, with big game, you have to have a permit.
Right.
So turkeys and deer, bear, things like that, you would have to. Now with small game or fur bears, you don't. If it's a problem and it's tearing your stuff up, you can take care of it.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right.
Well, I'd like, before you walk, and maybe you answered the question I didn't understand. The state law supersedes the county ordinances. So what is the state law? Nobody can just go hunt. Can you hunt on your own land in the city limits with a rifle?
If you want to. The state law just opens and it says that we'll open and close the seasons. So if it's within those seasons and it's you're legally hunting, that would be a defense to a city ordinance that says you can't shoot a gun in the city limits. Then they were going to say, well, state law says it's hunting season. I can shoot a gun to legally hunt whatever wildlife I'm hunting. So it's they could still charge somebody, but that's going to be a defense for that. Not saying that if you're there, the city police in Clarksville, for example, aren't going to come up and say, because when I worked there, we had this come up a lot. Yeah.
Mr. Cook.
Yes.
Tracy, could you speak to the North American Wildlife Compact? Because doesn't that supersede all of this? Is that true or not? The Wildlife Compact, I thought that is what the... Yeah, isn't that model what all this is based on, where all across North America, everything, it's as you said, you really can't stop someone from hunting.
That is what these laws have been based upon. But the legislature has created a state law in Tennessee that provides for hunting, and you can't make that illegal by municipal ordinance. It's always going to trump. So it's going to be that way probably everywhere else. But there are probably 6 or 7 AG opinions on this issue, asking if they can stop hunting within a city limits, and it has consistently been found that no, they cannot, because that is a state law.
Great, thank you.
Anybody else? James, did you get out of that without answering any questions?
I think so.
Oh, wait a minute. All right. Thank you very much, James. We look forward to
Thank you.
seeing you again in February. Mr. Chairman, that concludes the business of the wildlife.
Thank you, Chairman Holbert. I'd like to call on, could we have a 15-minute break, please? So be back at, let's see what time, you'll say 2:35. How's that sound?